So, the US continues to outperform other nations in per capita GDP.
Okay.
What is per capita GDP? Per capita GDP stands for gross domestic product per person. In simple terms, it's a measure of how much economic output is produced on average by each person in a country. It's one of the most widely used indicators of a nation's wealth, productivity, and the standard of living in that country. As of 2023, the U.S. had a per capita GDP of nearly $83,000, placing it in the top 10 globally. That number represents the economic value generated per person, and it tells us about the country's ability to produce goods, deliver services, and also generate income. But what does this really mean? It means that, on average, each person in the U.S. economy takes home about $83,000 per year as income. Let's look at how the U.S. per capita GDP has evolved over time. First, we'll differentiate between nominal and real per capita GDP. Nominal per capita GDP looks at the current prices of the market and does not account for inflation, so it tends to rise sharply over time. Real per capita GDP, on the other hand, is adjusted for inflation. It gives us a more accurate picture of the standard of living over time. So when we take a look at the graphs, we see the real per capita GDP, the graph on the right, has been rising over time steadily. It doesn't look as steep of an increase as the graph on the left because, again, it is adjusted for inflation. We see that it has seen impressive growth. It's important to mention that in 2008, there was the great financial crisis, so the economy faced a lot of challenges and unemployment rose. The U.S. began a recovery period during this time and eventually exceeded previous levels again and again in 2020 during the pandemic. The U.S. per capita GDP dipped again before again recovering. This shows the resilience of the market and the U.S.'s ability to come back from struggles. As of 2023, per capita GDP is higher than ever, reflecting the strength of the labor market and the increases in productivity over time. So this leads us to ask, why has the per capita GDP continued to rise so consistently in the U.S.? A big part of the answer is productivity, more specifically labor productivity, which is how much output a worker produces in a given amount of time. One important factor of this is labor turnover. According to The Economist, workers in the U.S. switch jobs at a high rate, about 5% per quarter. This is a good thing because it shows that people are moving into roles where their skills are a better fit, which will then, in turn, boost output. Technology and machinery help produce output at a higher rate, highlighting the importance of productive efficiency. By using machinery, companies are able to streamline operations, reduce manual labor, and lessen the probability of errors. This way, workers are replaced with machinery, allowing workers to do jobs that they are more needed for. Education also helps improve labor productivity because more people are getting their degrees and entering the workforce with more knowledge, making it easier to adapt. The U.S. also has some of the best universities, which attract some of the best students from around the world. Another factor that plays into labor productivity is immigration. The labor force has grown over time because of immigration, and the immigrants that come to this country are able to fill vital roles in all sectors. Taking a look at the graph, we can see labor productivity in America compared to the Euro area, Britain, and Japan. The graph shows the labor productivity per hour worked, where you can see that the U.S. has set itself apart from the Euro area and Britain, nations that were once much closer in output, from 1990 to around 2005, when the U.S. started to take off in productivity and is now the leading country. Innovation has also played a significant role in the outperformance of the U.S. versus other nations in per capita GDP. So important innovations to note are innovations in tech as well as machinery and manufacturing. The combination of the two of these things have significantly boosted productive output. The U.S. leads the high-value industries like technology and finance, which is really important to note because innovation is super important in both of these fields. Additionally, there's been significant improvements in techniques for extracting hydrocarbons from once uplight shale rocks, making America the biggest producer of oil and gas. This is really important to note as well because if not for those innovations, America would not be the biggest producer of oil and gas. So innovation is very significant in boosting economic output. Another thing that the US does really well is investing in capital. This really boosts the per capita GDP for the US because the US invests more in research and development than almost every other country at almost 3.5% of the total US GDP. Only South Korea and Israel are able to match or beat the US in this aspect. So, the US workers have physical tools at their disposal, such as highways and warehouses, but they also have software. Additionally, non residential investments form about 17% of GDP in the US since the 1990s, which is higher than the shares in large European countries. The combination of these things increases productive capacity, which funds innovation and expansion. So, to compare the US to other countries, in 2024, each American worker generated about $171,000 in output, which compares to $120,000 in the Euro area, $118,000 in the UK, and only $96,000 in Japan. Since 1990, US per worker output has grown by about 70%. Whereas in the UK, it grew by 46%, the Euro area was 29%, and Japan was just 25%. In terms of per capita output, the US is now about 40% higher than Western Europe and Canada and 60% higher than Japan. Since 2020, the US economy has grown about 10% in real terms, which is 3 times the pace of the rest of the G7. So, in conclusion, how does the US continue to lead in per capita GDP compared to the other nations? So, the US leads in per capita GDP due to a combination of several different factors, which we mentioned today. Some of these factors include high labor productivity, constant innovation, smart capital investment, and an educated workforce. Other countries may match the US in one or two of these areas, like how before we mentioned that South Korea and Israel were both able to invest almost as much as the US, if not more, in capital investments, where we were at 3.5%, but they weren't able to match in the other areas such as innovation and labor productivity and stuff like that. So that's what sets the American economy apart, and what continues to drive its output and what continues to allow it to overachieve and outperform these other nations.